Greetings. My name is Tim McDermott. I'm an OSU Extension educator in Franklin County in Agriculture and Natural Resources. Today we are going to do a quick update on ticks for beef quality assurance. So a couple of fast facts about ticks are: one, they vector, which means they transmit disease to hosts. They can transmit bacterial disease, viral disease, and actually there is an allergic syndrome that a human, if they get bit by the Lone Star tick, can get if they react negatively to the carbohydrates in the tick saliva. And all of these diseases and our understanding about ticks and the new research about new ticks that are entering into our habitat or new invasives that are spreading into our country change rapidly. It's amazing how fast. I have to update this slide deck because we learn new things all the time. We're going to be talking about the hard shell ticks today. There are tons and tons of ticks that are out there, hard and soft shell. And one of the things to realize about ticks is they are arachnids, right? So they're related to spiders, and that is something that relates to how they do their feeding and their hunting. They hunt via questing, which means they take the back two pair of legs, they hold onto the vegetation, the front two are out there reaching to grab prey as it walks by. They don't run fast, they don't jump high, they don't fly, they grab you when you walk by. And generally these are three-stage life cycle ticks. They're going to go through larval stage to nymphal stage to adult stage, and that can take up to several years for that to be accomplished. Lots of myths that are out there, and we want to dispel a lot of these myths. Myth number one is ticks are only active in summer. Actually, because they have a multi-year life cycle and because of the climate change disruptions we're seeing, it's not uncommon for you to encounter ticks depending on life stage at any part of the year. Another myth is that ticks prefer the woods, and while there are some species that prefer the woods, and most ticks do like to have a shadier, more humid habitat, there are some tick species that actually can tolerate a little more sun and prefer a little bit more open habitat, such as meadows, pastures, and fields. And then myth number three is that it takes a day to transmit disease, and that is some old data that was based on transmission of Lyme disease in black-legged or deer ticks. But we're finding that depending on the tick species, the life cycle stage of the tick, and the disease that they're carrying, there's a great amount of variability, with some laboratory results indicating that transmission times can be very rapid from tick to host. So let's take a look at some of the ticks we're going to talk about today that are Ohio ticks. We're going to talk about 5 different kinds. The first 3 we're going to go through pretty quick, and then I want to update you on where we stand with the last 2. The takeaway from this picture is all the way at the far left here. And so this is a nymph, and larval stages are not much bigger than this. They're extraordinarily tiny. An adult is not very large and can be difficult to spot if you're not checking really closely. But boy, these larval forms and these nymphal forms are very, very tiny. And if they have done a blood feeding on a host and picked up a disease, then they could potentially transmit those to the next host that they feed upon. So the American dog tick's been around for a while, and this is the one that when I was in practice I encountered very, very commonly. This has colonized the majority of the eastern half of the United States. This is a tick that will tolerate out in pastures and meadows, and so a producer might encounter this if they're out there doing a pasture walk or working cattle. All ticks transmit various diseases. No one tick transmits all of them. American dog tick is noted for transmission of Rocky Mountain spotted fever. So here's the black-legged tick. This is one that does prefer a little more of a wooded habitat. This one is known as the transmitter of Lyme disease, amongst other diseases it can transmit. And there are some livestock species that can pick up Lyme disease from this, as well as humans and companion animals. So you want to be really careful when you're out there checking for deer ticks, because Lyme disease is no joke. So the Lone Star tick is a relative newcomer to Ohio. It's probably been around between 5 and 10 years. This is really a prominent tick when I do summer tick drags in the southern part of Ohio, down in those riverbend counties where we have a lot of grazing. The Lone Star tick can vector any number of diseases. One of the things that's really a concern to beef producers is this is the tick that has some chemical similarities in its saliva to the carbohydrates in mammalian muscle. And this is a tick that is been postulated that if you are bitten by it and you do have an allergic reaction to that salivary component, then you can develop an allergy to mammalian muscle, which means if you get that allergy, which is called alpha-gal or mammalian muscle allergy, you become allergic to things like beef, pork, venison, or lamb. So let's talk about this guy right here. This is the Gulf Coast tick, and we've had our eye on it for a little while because it's slowly been spreading northward, really kind of up that Ohio River Valley from its native habitat around the Gulf Coast. This tick's been around for a long time. This tick has been confirmed in Ohio now in 3 counties, Butler, Hamilton, and Claremont, where there are established populations. This is a tick that has been around for a long time. It's not invasive. It was first identified back in 1844. It has a long history associated with the livestock industry in the United States. In the early 1900s, 1930s, 40s, when we had our screwworm outbreak that really devastated the livestock industry, this tick helped that outbreak along because it has a very large hypostome over here, this piercing, sucking mouth part, and this tick, when it feeds, also is noted for, after feeding, leaving kind of a wound in place, an eschar or an ulcerated area, and that was very attractive to the screwworm, which, as we know, is the fly maggot that actually feeds on living tissue. And so this has a long history in the United States. Recently in Ohio, this is another one that, because of its native range down south, can tolerate a little bit more open area, a little bit more heat, a little bit more sun. It looks very similar to the dog tick in appearance. The diseases that it vectors of worry are to humans, Rickettsia parkeri, which is a spotted fever similar to Rickettsia rickettsii, which is also known as Rocky Mountain spotted fever. It does have some diseases it transmits to canines. It does have some diseases it transmits to livestock, although we don't currently have heart water here in the United States. But the worry is in the laboratory, this has been found that it could potentially vector leptospirosis, and lepto is a major worry in livestock producers and companion animals should this start to spread that disease. So we're going to keep a close eye out on that one. But be aware that we have Gulf Coast ticks here in Ohio now, and they are in the southwest corner of the state, and we will be doing some active surveillance to see where it's going and what it's doing. Originally, if you take a look at this, it was a Gulf Coast pattern. This right here, this yellow extension into Oklahoma and Arkansas, was a expansion where the tick was moved via shipping, and when it got into these areas, even though it was not a native host range for this tick, it rapidly colonized it. It didn't mind the habitat, and it had food. And so this outline that I've drawn here, which I do recognize looks kind of like a turtle, is about where it is now, slowly moving its way up. This is probably exaggerated a little bit, but it's extended further up the East Coast, and it is in Ohio now. And so what's worrisome would be that if it would continue its northern spread. So we've talked in the past about the invasive Asian longhorn tick. This is a tick that was discovered at a farm in New Jersey with small ruminant farmer had found that one of his sheep was covered in a tick that he didn't recognize, and when they brought the veterinarians and the federal government in, they found that this was a invasive tick that had not been previously identified in the United States, called the Asian longhorn tick, and they have no idea how it got to this farm. Previous testing of some samples that they had taken over the years indicates that it might have originally come in around 2010 or 2013. They speculate maybe on a dog that was brought in via international travel. But this tick is worrisome because it really can breed, and it can breed aggressively. This tick has the ability to reproduce itself via parthenogenesis, and that means that the female does not need a male to breed with to lay eggs. So in fact, when they checked at that farm in New Jersey originally, they found all the ticks that were on that farm were genetic clones. And what we're worried about is being able to accurately identify this tick. So when you look at it, it is just sort of this regular old brown tick. It looks very similar to a number of ticks that don't necessarily affect humans, but affect wildlife. And it also looks very similar to a very common tick that we would find called the brown dog tick. This tick has been found in Ohio. The first case was discovered in Gallia County on a stray dog from its original New Jersey state. It has spread now to 15 states, discovered here in Ohio just this summer. And so this is one that we worry about because when we look at the model in terms of where it lives in its native host range, we see that it has the ability to colonize the majority of the eastern half of the United States, as well as some of the coastal western United States. And this model is very similar to where we're at right now on this eastern half, to the American dog tick, to the deer tick, where the Lone Star tick is headed, and where we're worried about where the Gulf Coast tick could live in the future as well. So this is a tick that actually prefers cattle. It does not really feed as aggressively on humans as, say, a Lone Star tick or a deer tick would. We were worried when we discovered it here, when we have an invasive, is will it be able to transmit diseases that we have here? Because over in its host range, it transmits a number of diseases. Some of them are severe. Unfortunately, it was discovered and verified in a study in West Virginia that it can transmit thyleria to cattle, which is a protozoal parasite sort of similar to malaria. And so that's very worrisome. The other problem with this is it can breed in such large numbers on cattle that it can actually cause blood loss anemia that can ultimately prove fatal, especially in calves. And because it's invasive, we have no veterinary approved labeling on our acaricides that we can use. So you need to work with your veterinarian to find a product that you could you can get veterinary approval for if you should discover this on your livestock. We're also going to try to get some grant funding to do some active surveillance for this tick going forward in 2021. So tick control is very, very important. Make sure you use permethrin treated clothing. You can purchase it at about any outfitter. You can buy products labeled for treatment of fabric and treat your own. Make sure you pair that with the repellent that you use topically. There's any number that are out there. Read the label very carefully. They have different application times, different ages in terms of children versus adults that it can be applied on. Make sure you remove the tick correctly. Get close to the head and pull up with gentle pressure. You need to make sure that you get that mouthpiece out. You don't want to grab it by the abdomen and yank. You might actually make the problem worse. And then save the ticks for identification or testing. Wash the area, wash your hands. Realize that ticks are prevention diseases. You do not want to get one actively feeding on you where it could potentially vector a disease to you. So make sure that you have your personal protective plan. You're using repellents topically, you're using permethrin insecticide applied to your clothing. Realize that any time that you go out, you have a chance that you might engage a tick and then find yourself at risk for any number of bacterial, viral diseases or allergic syndromes. Make sure you keep your furry friends in mind because companion animals can break biosecurity. We have great products out there for cats and dogs. And then make sure you identify the correct way to remove a tick. Remove that tick, save it for identification and testing. If you have any concerns and you need to get a tick tested, make sure to engage your Agriculture and Natural Resources Extension educator in your county. Thank you so much.